Welcome back to our video series, in which we investigate the nature of Soviet revisionism. In the past 3 episodes, we have already done a lot to explain exactly which revisionist deviations the Soviet Union suffered from and how they are to be assessed. We found out that the notion of state capitalism is insufficient to explain the characteristics of the revisionist USSR. Despite material incentives and the introduction of profitability into the planning process, the Soviet economy was still essentially socialist. However, the leadership did deviate considerably from communist principles. In today's episode, we are going to investigate how exactly the leadership was able to justify this deviation to the Soviet public. Traditional Marxism would have suspected the first successful socialist revolution to take place in an advanced capitalist country. Marx would not have expected the success of the Bolshevik October Revolution in a backward Russia. At the time of the Soviet takeover, Russia's economy was neither fully industrialized, nor was there even a proletarian majority. History has shown that this was not a coincidence, but rather it was a pattern. A socialist revolution is not only possible in a backward country plagued by imperialism, but that it is also even more likely to happen in it when compared to advanced capitalist countries. However, historical materialism teaches us that the new power, the socialist institutions and mindset, emerge from where the weight of the current societal order weighs heaviest, and under capitalism, that is the proletariat. For Russia, that meant that the vast peasant majority saw the socialist revolution mainly as a way out of feudal oppression, without having developed a socialist morality. This is exactly the explanation for why historical socialism was seemingly plagued by a lack of ideological firmness. In many cases, a cult of personality around leaders like Stalin, Mao, and others had to take the place of true socialist conviction and revolutionary science. Therefore, it seems more appropriate to say that revisionists like Khrushchev did not create the ideological decay of the post-Stalin era in the Soviet Union, but that a lack of socialist consciousness caused the revisionism in the first place. Despite their efforts to promote self-management and to fight the bureaucracy, Soviet socialism under Lenin and Stalin failed to institutionalize bottom-up initiative by the masses. This error would later be addressed by Mao, who knew that socialism is and must be a dynamic process in order to avoid bureaucratization. Further, in the Soviet Union, socialist society was seen as a machine that works exactly as it is supposed to unless it is sabotaged by outside forces. This metaphor shaped the policing approach of the Stalin era. But the bureaucratization, which would have to follow the lack of mass initiative and the ignoring of internal contradictions, was averted for a while due to Stalin's principled leadership and personality. It was only a matter of time until the gap left by him would be filled by opportunists. After Stalin, we had a huge number of the working class who, just a few decades ago, were formerly peasants. They never truly knew the exploitation of the industrial proletariat under capitalism, and therefore they lacked a proper socialist mentality. Additionally, the Soviet people had just finished fighting a grueling war against the Nazis and experienced the more authoritarian years of Stalin's leadership. It is no surprise that a charismatic opportunist like Khrushchev came to power under these circumstances. And although he used lies and deception to consolidate his position, he did appeal to popular sentiments. He measured the economic success of the Soviet Union against the United States, and thus shifted the focus of the masses away from communist principles towards consumerism. Since the people already had enough reasons to be satisfied with the current state of Soviet society, and often lacked a proper socialist mentality, it was easy for them to redirect their attention towards their own immediate material conditions and away from abstract egalitarian goals. Khrushchev further sought peaceful relations with the capitalist world. We can imagine such a policy to be popular in a society that only 10 years earlier had lost 27 million people to a war. Many also still remembered the Civil War a little more than 35 years before Khrushchev came to power. And so, the people may have liked his revisionist idea of a state of the whole people because it promised a peaceful social environment. Khrushchev addressed not only the people's desire for peace and consumer goods, but also the party and state officials' desire for safety, as they were the main victims of Stalin-era repression. After Stalin, the Soviet leadership had to choose between two roads. The revisionist road that sought to manage and preserve the socialist state more or less on its current level, and that would eventually lay the groundwork for capitalist restoration. Or the socialist road that sought to inspire new revolutionary consciousness in the masses and continue to transform society from below, even at the cost of stability. From our historical analysis, it is clear why the Soviet Union took the revisionist road. During his lifetime, Stalin failed to institutionalize his fight against the bureaucracy. Soviet socialism became stagnant. It could also reasonably be argued that the revisionist turn of the Soviet Union already started during the later years of Stalin's leadership. Although it was Khrushchev who introduced the doctrine of peaceful coexistence, Stalin had already been very cautious about supporting progressive movements abroad since he did not want to risk a war with the United States. Under Stalin, the economic relationship between the Soviet Union and its Eastern European allies had some clearly imperialist tendencies. This policy was seen by the Soviets as compensation for the damage they suffered during World War II. For example, the USSR demanded harsh economic concessions from Yugoslavia, even though it did not even collaborate with Nazi Germany. It was only after Stalin that the Soviets put an end to this practice. However, it was Khrushchev's revisionism that would entail new revisionism, and problems would spiral upwards. Khrushchev's emphasis on consumerism would incite bourgeois desires in the people he could not fulfill in the long term. His idea of a state of the whole people had the working class lower its guard against the possibility of capitalism re-emerging in the future. Brezhnev's reluctance to fight the second economy allowed it to become a breeding ground and a financial source for capitalist sentiments and ideas. Socialism eventually ended when Gorbachev gave in to the influence of a proto-bourgeoisie lurking in the shadows of the black market. Revisionist policies had produced an economic base that fostered a more and more bourgeois superstructure. The restoration of capitalism was a process that could have been stopped. The Stalin government had nationalized the economy after the NEP period, but its ideologically weak successors were unable to react properly to economic challenges. The policies of Khrushchev and Brezhnev were not a restoration of capitalism, but right opportunism, a simple and unprincipled solution to a complex problem. We can say that because, even after those reforms, the Soviet economy still lacked vital features of capitalism. The idea that Khrushchev and his small clique of party elites single-handedly restored capitalism is a symptom of the liberal great man theory, and it fails to look at societal development from a dialectical perspective. Quantitative changes in favor of capitalism do not yet amount to a capitalist restoration. They should not be taken for anything more than they were, an increase in the strength of the counter-revolutionary social base inside of an imperfect socialist society. They were indeed a long-term cause for the actual counter-revolution to happen in the later years, but they were not necessarily a counter-revolution themselves. Just because the Soviet Union had lost its progressive momentum and society started moving back towards capitalism, that did not yet equal capitalism itself. From all of this, we see that even Stalin could not have stopped the revisionist degradation of Soviet society if he had magically stepped out of his grave. Neither could the Maoist cultural revolution movement have saved Soviet socialism in the long term if it had spread to the Soviet Union. The fact is that both Soviet and Chinese socialism had historical handicaps and did not stand firmly on the ground of revolutionary science. Both, although to varying degrees, relied on a cult of personality and made the error of looking at socialist society through a policing paradigm in which every resistance is to be seen as a counter-revolutionary attack. In short, Every variation of historical socialism had to fail because their revolutionary science was premature. It was only on the basis of their failures that the LLCO was able to develop leading light communism, the last and final stage of communism. No cults of personality, no self-serving narratives, no dogmatism, no revisionism, only the purest form of science directed towards the total liberation of all of humanity.